Video 19, how the situation people are living in has been managed throughout history. Hi everyone, this video focuses on the fact that given the type of events and crises which have happened, it has mattered incredibly how the world situation has been managed over time. And while the Meghallean drought crisis prompted the name of that whole period, there have been a number of factors which have also influenced global development during this and other periods. Hence, what we ultimately see is humanity creating a world system capable of supporting people's ability to control their own destiny as it evolves from the situation in which we can see it emerging out of nature. I'm sure you will see how the events of the Meghallean period are more related to the appearance of the world order, and that I agree with Guy Middleton from the last video in the sense that the whole term Meghallean age is a bit misleading because of the way it implies the drought crisis defined the whole of the last 4,000 years, which is, I think, grossly overplaying its impact, assuming that societies once set in motion by this event became unable to change their nature and course of action, when in fact there was a massive human response, and there are many other factors in addition to this over the millennia which show people have been increasingly able to gain more control over their own lives. So let's have a look at human social history in terms of the proportions in which the way the whole thing has evolved so far, to look at the impact of so-called major events and how the whole situation has been managed over time. Within the timescale of the Quaternary period as a whole, in which humans emerged in the first part out of Africa in the Pleistocene, then developed societies over the last 11,000 years throughout the Holocene, I believe the whole reason for the emergence of the third Anthropocene period is because there has been an argument for it ever since settled civilizations started to become successful. The actual discovery of farming in itself wasn't enough. But when early societies began to make a profit, their leaderships were secured. And this means that certain people became safe from wild animals and the forces of nature. So they began the monarchies of the ancient world and their religious traditions, which were designed to protect societies through their successful management. And this must have happened during the later Greenlandian period and throughout the North Grippian period, as the earliest evidence of metalworking is a copper pendant dated at 8,700 BC. Hence, we can see ourselves having surpassed the basic survival needs, as the existence of jewelry indicates a new type of culture emerging. The most metalwork periods started between 6,000 and 2,000 BC, so the tendency towards societies with mass culture organised around urban centres continued into the Meghallean period. So if we consider the world moving through the time of the Meghallean drought crisis, rather than seeing this as some sort of absolute boundary between different levels of existence, we can see that what happened there must be that as settled societies grew much larger afterwards, there must have been a reorganisation which then led to a return to the mass migration to urban centres. And indeed, that reorganisation should have served that purpose. This, to a large extent, then contributed to the internal power struggles in the ancient world, and we can also see the world order issue developing as they filled up all the territory between themselves. Hence, we may consider the rise of the world order issue as the beginning of a complex political situation, and not just a case of them being larger civilizations. First, we have the unification of Egypt, even though its old society, which is 2686 to 2181 BC, collapsed during the time of the Meghallean drought crisis. It re-emerged as the Middle Kingdom. Then a new period of huge prosperity followed by the Late Kingdom, with intermediate periods in between. So then there was the Ptolemaic period and the Roman period. So clearly its society reorganised in the response to the drought crisis, but also because of various others, such as internal power struggles, international events, and changes in the world order. Therefore, we could say Egypt was not only the first, but a place which we can also measure the developments around it, which show an improvement in social systems, law codes, and human rights all the way across the cradles of civilization in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, and then later in Mexico and Peru. But then when we get to the Medo-Persian Empire, Greece, Rome, and Han China in the first millennium BC, their activities superseded the cradles of civilization in which language and writing systems first developed, as we see revolutions, rebellions, new religions, and invasions on a global scale. The Persian Empire became the first multicultural empire, and the trend towards a more global vision of society continued towards the rise of monotheism out of Judaism around 0 AD. Just as the ancient gods represented the forces of nature, as we see humans transcend their initial material condition, we see the assimilation of the ancient gods into a single, all-powerful God like we found in Christianity and Islam. Then there was the Middle Ages, and we can use our knowledge of the way events occurred here to look at them in the context of the way the situation was managed, as Christianity and its religious orders converted Europe to a new timescale for the development of events in the West. Islam created a series of empires which surrounded Europe and prevented it from expanding. Europe consolidated instead, with the papacy creating the Holy Roman Empire out of the converted Germanic tribes, which lasted around 1,000 years until Napoleon in 1806, and around it the nation of Europe appeared, like England, Poland, Hungary, and France and Spain happening later. So subsequently, Christianity and Islam created a balance of power which was only disrupted by the Mongols' biggest ever land empire, which controlled most of Asia and attempted to invade Europe, while the Turkish conquest of the Eastern Roman Empire, taking over the Byzantines and present-day Turkey, combined with this and blocked the land trade routes into Europe. This drove the Europeans out into the Americas, whereby they created sea trade routes, and their recolonization, rediscovery of the Americas, created a fresh incentive to bring modern government and the rise of scientific ideas to the East, which had previously attempted to conquer them. So since then, the New World's idea of the world order, which has often been called the New World Order, has been in competition with the old, especially as the US Constitution inspired a series of revolutions, including the French, across Europe as we move into the modern periods. So in the Middle Ages, we could say the interaction between empires was the biggest force behind social change. In the modern periods, things changed dramatically as the Europeans take over the Americas, created the Spanish Empire, and it became the most powerful in the world, thus bringing huge challenges to the Holy Roman Empire in Central Europe. The papacy ran into problems as the Protestant Reformation divided Europe, and a series of wars emerged over the balance of power. So this happened while the rise of the United States occurred, and the French Revolution inspired a series of revolutions which swept across Europe in the 1800s, preceding the emergence of communism as the rise of parliaments and middle-class industrialists failed to bring the reform to capitalism which exploited the workers. After new imperialism led to Europe's empires entering a land grab in Asia and Africa, competition between them saw the collapse of Europe into World War I, out of which emerged the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of fascism to counter it as it inspired workers' uprisings in Central Europe. However, during this time, the power of parliaments also grew larger, and there were social movements which achieved success in terms of securing more rights for workers, the abolishment of slavery, and breakthroughs in technology such as widespread use of electricity and the motor vehicle. Hence, during the modern periods, it was the rise of parliaments and political movements which created the most change. World War II then led to the partition of Germany, as it failed to invade both Britain and the Soviet Union and became divided between the Soviet Union on one side, Britain, France and the US on the other. In what became known as the postmodern era, the Cold War quickly broke out as chilly relations developed over how to administrate Germany, as they both sides wanted to introduce their own currency into it. I've described the phases of the postmodern age in detail, and thus how we come to the world of today, in which computers have replaced political movements as the primary method by which progress is created. But it was not until the 2010s that stratigraphers defined the Megalayan age as our concept of global society, along with the other two divisions of the Holocene, the Greenlandian and North Grippian. So I'm wondering why it has taken so long to actually identify the issue with the age we live in. It appears that for such a long time, we have conceived of ourselves as being members of societies which have arisen out of history. And it is only the rise of computers which has allowed everyone to see things objectively in terms of the periods people live in. So It's not a simple case of the drought crisis being used as an anchor point for a timescale of events in which the power structures need to monopolise power for so long as the result of societal collapse to quell the riots, subdue the uprisings, until we finally appeared at a world people wanted to live in. It's actually been people who have been unable to educate themselves and been dependent on the information given to them. So what I mean by this is that the actual shift in how to see the world has only arisen with the internet, and this is what's leading to the Anthropocene. So in other words, the problem of the Megalian age is one thing, and we can attribute the drought crisis as being the cause of it, but then over time, people themselves have created change to the point where now we're able to realize all this, and that's why it's taken so long. So that is what now will lead to the announcement of the Anthropocene, as these scientific research actually causes things to fall into place for the scientists and other people. Especially with the rise of independent journalism as well, the type of knowledge people can have has changed, and they can even have knowledge of what's happening in terms of government. So it's not surprising that this coincides with the appearance of the Anthropocene, which has been developing really all along within human societies, and it represents a creation of global society where the well-being of citizens has become a universal reality. This is why it seems communism could never win the Cold War, because the European countries had a natural method of development which got a boost from taking over the Americas and were hence able to make concessions which appeased their populations, thus thwarting the revolutionary element's ability to overthrow their governments. However, as I mentioned in the last video, the difference between the Anthropocene is that while the previous focus of geological ages has been on the impact of events of nature upon life on Earth, the focus is now on the impact of life on Earth upon nature, meaning that we need to progress from the main problem that divides humanity, which is politics. And as more people are realizing this right across the sciences and political spectrum, we are seeing an increased analysis of the way events are occurring and who is accountable for them, resulting in a more integrated and intelligent approach to global issues. What the social sciences must look at, therefore, is while there is still a problem with the phases of the structure global civilization is going through, in general, how can the world as a whole make the paradigm shift into the Anthropocene when it seems like the need to realize humanity as a single species is the goal? And this will create more consensus towards taking action, both on the environment and on the problem with the world order situation. So I'm trying to put together as much information as I can on the subject so people can improve wherever possible and look ahead for future trends. It would seem that with computers, the way forward is general information posted online with free access or targeted towards specific fields for particular types of information, as the new digital world order is what's giving people the ability to address the issues which run through the whole of global society, meaning that a lot of change with regard to this will be seemingly invisible.